The Galactic Council Hall was unlike anything Elias Kade had ever seen. It was massive, an awe-inspiring cathedral of alien engineering, its walls shimmering with iridescent light that shifted colors as if it were alive. The ceiling soared above like an endless void, dotted with tiny, glowing constellations that mimicked the galaxy outside. The air itself buzzed faintly, an almost imperceptible hum of energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Elias adjusted the collar of his formal diplomatic uniform, the stiff fabric biting into his neck as he tried not to gawk. "This place," he muttered to his aide, a young woman named June, who stood beside him clutching a tablet. "Looks like it's designed to make us feel small." "Maybe because we are small," June whispered back, her voice barely audible over the low murmur of alien voices around them. The council chamber was filled with delegates from dozens of species, each more strange and fascinating than the last. To Elias's right, a delegation of slender, bioluminescent beings floated inches above the floor, their skin glowing softly in shades of teal and green. To his left, a group of insectoid aliens clicked their mandibles in rapid bursts of sound, their glossy carapaces reflecting the chamber's shifting lights. Across the room, a towering figure with molten gold skin and eyes like burning coals stood silently, exuding an aura of quiet menace. Elias forced himself to focus. He wasn't here to admire the scenery or marvel at the galaxy's diversity. He was here as humanity's representative, Earth's first diplomat to the Galactic Council. And the stakes couldn't be higher. At the center of the chamber, the council's presiding speaker, a towering figure with segmented limbs and a voice that resonated like thunder, called the meeting to order. The murmurs quieted, and Elias felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes turning toward him. He stepped forward, his polished boots clicking against the crystalline floor. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Elias began, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "On behalf of humanity, I thank you for granting us the opportunity to join this esteemed assembly. We come in peace, eager to contribute to the shared prosperity of the galaxy." His words were translated instantly by the sleek device clipped to his lapel, the synthesized voice projecting his speech in dozens of alien tongues. For a moment there was silence. Then a ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber, the alien delegates exchanging glances and whispered remarks. Elias couldn't tell if it was a good sign or a bad one. The presiding speaker's voice boomed across the chamber. "Humanity's formal introduction is noted. The floor is open to questions." A delegate from a race of avian creatures stepped forward, their feathers shimmering with iridescent light. "You claim to bring peace," they said, their voice high and sharp, "but your history suggests otherwise. Your species has waged countless wars on your own world. What assurance do we have that you will not bring such chaos here?" Elias opened his mouth to respond, but another delegate cut in, a small amphibian-like creature with bulbous eyes and a voice that gurgled like water. "Your species is also peculiar. Your customs, your emotions, your laughter. It is unsettling." Elias froze. Laughter? That was what unsettled them. Before he could form a response, the amphibian delegate continued. "Take, for example, your jokes. A peculiar human researcher once said, what was it? Ah, yes. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything." The room fell silent. Elias blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Then the sheer absurdity of the moment hit him. He stifled a snort, but it was too late. A chuckle escaped his lips, quickly followed by another. Around him, the human delegation broke into laughter. Low, nervous at first, then building into something uncontrollable. The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the crystalline walls like a wave. The alien delegates recoiled. The bioluminescent beings dimmed their glow, retreating as if the sound might harm them. The insectoids clicked their mandibles furiously, their movements jittery and erratic. Even the molten gold figure shifted uneasily, its burning eyes narrowing. "What is this?" the presiding speaker demanded, their voice thunderous and sharp. "Explain yourselves, humans. What is the meaning of this sound? Elias struggled to regain control, wiping tears from his eyes. It's laughter, he managed, his voice shaking. A sign of amusement. It's harmless. Harmless? The speaker's segmented limbs twitched, their towering form leaning forward. It sounds like a warning, a threat. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder, rising into a cacophony of clicks, gurgles, and hisses. Some delegates looked terrified, others furious. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on Elias like a storm about to break. "Please," he called out, raising his hands. "You misunderstand. Laughter isn't a threat. It's an expression of joy, of connection." But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The presiding speaker conferred briefly with a group of advisers, their movements sharp and urgent. Then they turned back to the chamber. "The Galactic Council will deliberate on this matter," the speaker announced. "Until then, humanity's status as a potential member will remain in question. Further actions may be deemed necessary." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Further actions? He didn't need a translator to understand the implied threat. The human delegation was escorted out of the chamber under heavy scrutiny, the alien delegates watching them with suspicion and unease. Elias's mind raced as they returned to their quarters. How had it gone so wrong so quickly, and how could he possibly fix it? As they entered their quarters, June broke the silence. "They're afraid of laughter? I mean, come on, that's ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous to them," Elias said, his voice tight. He slumped into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "To them it's alien, unpredictable, threatening." "What do we do?" another delegate asked. "They're talking about further actions." "That doesn't sound good." Elias stared at the floor, his mind churning. "We find a way to show them what laughter really means, and we do it fast." "How?" June asked, her tone skeptical. "They don't understand us. They don't trust us." Elias looked up, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "Then we make them understand. We'll show them that laughter isn't just noise. It's connection. It's humanity." Even as he said the words, he wasn't sure how he'd make it happen. But one thing was clear. The fate of Earth's first interstellar alliance rested on something as simple and as complicated as a laugh. The air in the human delegation's quarters was thick with tension. Elias Kade leaned against the cold metal wall, staring at the holographic projection of the Galactic Council's chamber, replaying on a screen in the center of the room. Laughter echoed faintly from the recording, sharp and distorted, a ghostly reminder of their misstep. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, the knuckles of his fingers pale from the strain. "How did we let it get this bad?" June asked, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled, her usual sharp demeanor cracking under the pressure. The glow of the projection cast a faint light over her furrowed brow, making the shadows in the room deeper, more oppressive. "It's not about what we let happen," Elias said, his tone measured but heavy with frustration. "It's about what they heard. To them, laughter was a threat. And we—" He gestured toward the screen where the scene replayed their laughter, erupting like thunder in the chamber. "We confirmed it." June slammed her tablet onto the table. "Confirmed it? By laughing? How is that fair?" "It doesn't matter if it's fair," Elias replied sharply, his voice rising just enough to make her flinch. He softened immediately, his shoulders sagging. "What matters is that they believe it. Perception is everything." Before anyone could respond, the door to their quarters hissed open. Two guards stepped inside, their insectoid forms bristling with tension. Their segmented limbs moved with unnerving precision as they scanned the room, their compound eyes glinting under the artificial light. "Human Representative Elias Kade," one of them said in a clicking, synthetic voice, "you are summoned to the private chambers of Reinar, linguistic advisor to the Council." Elias straightened, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Summoned? For what purpose?" "Questions," the guard replied flatly. "You will follow us." The walk to Reinar's chambers was a study in discomfort. The corridors of the council complex were dimly lit, their walls a patchwork of alien metals and organic-looking textures that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. A faint hum filled the air, vibrating just below the threshold of hearing, making Elias's teeth ache. He kept his expression neutral, though his senses were heightened, each step echoing ominously. Reinar's chambers were stark and functional, with clean lines and an almost sterile atmosphere. The alien linguist stood in the center, his slender form draped in a metallic robe that shimmered faintly under the room's pale light. His skin was smooth and a muted silver, his long, angular face devoid of visible emotion, but his eyes, a shade of iridescent violet, burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Elias's spine. "You are the one they call Elias Kade," Reinar said, his voice soft but resonant, each word precise as if chosen with great care. He gestured to a seat across from him, his long, elegant fingers glinting faintly. "Sit." Elias obeyed, lowering himself into the chair without breaking eye contact. The silence stretched, and he resisted the urge to fidget under the alien's unblinking gaze. The room smelled faintly of something metallic and sharp, and the air felt cool against his skin. "Your laughter," Reinar began, the word seeming foreign in his mouth. "It has caused considerable distress. Why?" Elias blinked, startled by the simplicity of the question. He leaned forward slightly, choosing his words carefully. "Laughter is not a threat. It's an expression of emotion, usually joy, amusement, or relief. It's how we connect, how we release tension." Reinar tilted his head, the movement unsettling in its precision. "Joy and threat are often intertwined in war cries. Why does yours sound so aggressive?" Elias exhaled, struggling to find an answer. "Because sound isn't universal. What feels comforting to one species might feel alarming to another. But I promise you, our laughter isn't meant to harm. It's—" "Enough," Reinar interrupted, raising a hand. His eyes narrowed, and his tone grew sharper. "Your promises mean little. Words can be weapons, and yours have yet to prove otherwise." The tension in the room was suffocating. Elias clenched his fists under the table, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel the weight of Reinar's judgment pressing down on him, each second stretching painfully. But then, unexpectedly, Reinar sighed, a sound that was more vibration than breath. "You intrigue me, human. Your species fascinates me in its chaos. Yet chaos often begets destruction." Elias seized on the opening. "Chaos also begets innovation," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We learn through mistakes. We adapt. Our laughter, our emotions, they're part of what makes us stronger." Reinar studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and gestured toward a console embedded in the wall. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a replay of the council chamber during the humans' laughter. The sound filled the room, distorted and alien in the silence. "Watch," Reinar said simply. Elias forced himself to listen. The laughter, so natural and comforting in his own ears, sounded discordant and jarring in this context. He could see why the council had reacted with fear. To them, it was unfamiliar, alien. When the recording ended, Reinar turned back to him. "You see now why they fear it." "Yes," Elias admitted, his voice quiet. "But fear can be overcome. If you're willing to help me, I think I can show them what laughter truly means." Reinar's eyes flickered, a faint hint of curiosity breaking through his composed facade. "How?" Elias leaned forward, his determination cutting through his exhaustion. "By finding common ground, a way to show them that laughter is more than sound. It's connection, but I need someone who understands their languages, their customs, to help me craft something that bridges the gap." Reinar was silent for a long time, the hum of the room filling the space between them. Finally he nodded, a small but deliberate motion. "I will assist you, but know this. Failure will not simply result in humiliation for your species. It will result in annihilation." Elias met his gaze, the weight of the moment sinking in. "Then we won't fail." As the guards escorted Elias back to his quarters, his mind raced with possibilities. Reinar's help was a lifeline, but it was far from a guarantee. He needed to craft something more than a simple explanation. He needed to create a moment that would resonate across species, something that would shift the Council's perspective entirely, and he had to do it before the Council's looming vote. The halls of the Galactic Council were unnervingly quiet, a silence laden with the weight of impending action. Elias Kade's footsteps echoed against the crystalline floor as he made his way back to the delegation chambers, his mind racing. The low hum of the energy conduits running along the walls seemed louder than usual, their steady vibration thrumming against his skull like an unspoken warning. The air was cooler here, almost sterile, carrying a faint metallic tang that left a bitter taste in his mouth. Renar walked beside him, his gait smooth and unhurried, his silver-hued skin shimmering faintly under the glow of the corridor's lights. His violet eyes betrayed nothing, though Elias could sense the alien's thoughts were far from calm. "You're quiet," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Should I be worried?" Renar glanced at him, but said nothing for a moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, almost clinical. "I am calculating probabilities." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Care to share?" "The odds of your plan succeeding remain unfavorable," Renar replied, his gaze fixed ahead. "Your species' reliance on emotional appeal over logic introduces too many variables. Chaos, as you say, does not guarantee success." Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that's comforting. Thanks for the pep talk." "You asked," Renar said, his lips twitching in what might have been amusement. For the briefest moment, Elias thought he caught a flicker of curiosity in the alien's expression, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. As they reached the human delegation's quarters, the door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the air was thick with tension. June stood near the central table, her hands gripping its edge as she stared at a holographic projection of the council chamber. The image flickered slightly, distorted by interference, but the scene it displayed was clear. A group of delegates huddled together, their postures tense and conspiratorial. "Backroom deals," June muttered, her voice laced with frustration. She looked up as Elias entered, her eyes narrowing. "They're planning something, Elias. Something big." Elias moved closer to the projection, his jaw tightening as he studied the scene. The delegates' movements were subtle, their gestures calculated. He recognized a few of them, members of the faction that had been most vocal about the so-called threat of humanity's laughter. "They're pushing for war," he said grimly. "They want to use this as an excuse to eliminate us before we even have a chance to prove ourselves." June nodded. "And they're gaining support. Fast." Elias felt a knot tighten in his chest. The timeline was shorter than he'd anticipated. If he didn't act soon, the Council's vote would tip against humanity, and there would be no turning back. "I need to address the Council," he said, turning to Renar. "If we wait any longer, it'll be too late." Renar studied him with an unreadable expression. "Your plan requires precision. If you rush, you risk losing what little advantage you have." "Advantage?" Elias asked, his voice rising. "We're about to be declared a threat to the galaxy because we laughed, Renar. What advantage do we have?" Renar tilted his head slightly, his violet eyes narrowing. "The element of unpredictability. It is the one trait that defines your species and confounds the Council." Elias stared at him, the words sinking in. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Unpredictability," he murmured. "Maybe that's exactly what we need." Before Renar could respond, the holographic projection shifted, its image replaced by a grainy feed of the council chamber. A voice crackled through the speakers, distorted but recognizable. "We cannot risk allowing this species to remain unchecked," one of the delegates was saying. "Their erratic behavior poses a threat not only to our traditions, but to our safety." Elias's fists clenched. "They're laying the groundwork for a vote," he said, his tone dark. "If we don't counter this now, we're done." June stepped forward, her expression fierce. "Then let's counter it. You've got a plan, right?" Elias hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glanced at Renar, who gave a small nod, then turned back to June. "I have a plan," he said, his voice firm. "But it's a gamble." "What kind of gamble?" June asked, her eyes narrowing. The kind that involves standing in front of the entire council and making them laugh, Elias replied. On purpose. The room fell silent, the audacity of the idea hanging heavy in the air. June looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You're joking, she said flatly. No, Elias said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But they will be. Reinar's expression didn't change, but Elias thought he saw the faintest hint of approval in the alien's gaze. If you can succeed, Reinar said, it may shift the council's perception, but the risk remains significant. I know, Elias said. He turned to June, his smile fading. I need your help to make this work. If I can craft a joke that translates across languages and cultures, something that highlights our shared humanity without undermining their traditions, it might be enough to show them we're not a threat. June frowned, her skepticism evident. You're betting the future of humanity on a joke. Elias met her gaze, his expression serious. I'm betting the future of humanity on the idea that we're more alike than they realize, that we can connect through something as simple and as complicated as laughter. June sighed, running a hand through her hair. All right, she said finally. Let's do it. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you. Elias grinned. Fair enough. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Elias, June, and Reinar worked tirelessly, crafting a joke that would resonate with the council's diverse delegates. They pored over linguistic patterns, cultural references, and the nuances of alien humor, or what little they understood of it. The room was filled with the faint hum of the holographic interface, the soft rustle of papers, and the occasional burst of frustration as they hit another roadblock. Finally, as the council prepared to reconvene, Elias stood before the mirror in his quarters, adjusting his uniform. His reflection stared back at him, a mix of determination and exhaustion etched into his features. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders. You ready for this? June asked, standing behind him. Elias met her gaze in the mirror and nodded. Ready as I'll ever be. As they made their way to the council chamber, the air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. The corridors were eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. Reinar walked beside him, his presence a steadying force. When they entered the chamber, all eyes turned to them. The room was packed, the tension palpable. Elias took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Let's make them laugh, he whispered to himself, stepping forward into the spotlight. The Galactic Council chamber was a cathedral of tension. The air itself seemed to buzz, vibrating with the unspoken weight of the impending vote. Elias Kade stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, the polished surface of the crystalline floor reflecting his stiff posture. Above him, the gallery of alien delegates formed a semicircle, their varied features bathed in the ethereal light of the holographic screens projecting notes and declarations. Each species observed him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Elias's throat felt dry, his palms slick with sweat, but he forced himself to exude calm confidence. It was the only weapon he had left. Reinar and June stood at the edge of the chamber, their presence a lifeline in the vastness of the alien scrutiny. Human Delegate Elias Kade, boomed the voice of the presiding speaker, their towering segmented form casting long shadows across the hall. You have been granted one opportunity to speak before this council. Proceed. Elias stepped forward, feeling the eyes of countless beings boring into him. He inhaled deeply, the faintly metallic scent of the chamber filling his lungs, and began. Honored members of the council, I stand before you today, not as a representative of Earth, but as a representative of something far more fundamental, understanding. The translator at his lapel clicked and whirred, transforming his words into dozens of alien languages. He could see the ripple of reactions as the meaning sank in. Some nodded, others narrowed their eyes in doubt. In the past days, Elias continued, a misunderstanding has brought us to the brink of conflict. A sound, a laugh, was perceived as a threat, and while I could spend hours explaining the intricacies of human emotion and humor, Words alone cannot erase fear. He let the silence stretch for a beat, the tension in the room thick and tangible. Then he glanced at Reinar, who gave him the faintest nod. It was time. "What if," Elias said, his voice steady, "instead of explaining, I show you?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The presiding speaker's segmented limbs twitched, their booming voice sharp. "Elaborate, human." "I've prepared something," Elias said, glancing toward the central holographic display. "A demonstration of what laughter truly means to humanity, and what it could mean to all of us." The chamber dimmed as the holographic display flared to life. Reinar had insisted on simplicity, a universal concept that transcended language and culture. The display projected an image of two figures, one humanoid and the other an abstract representation of an alien. They stood opposite each other, divided by a jagged line. "The divide between us," Elias explained, gesturing to the image, "is vast. Our languages, our traditions, our very perceptions of the universe are shaped by different worlds, different histories." The hologram shifted, showing the two figures fumbling to communicate. The alien's gestures were rigid, while the human's expressions were animated, exaggerated. The audience watched in silence, their curiosity growing. "But what happens," Elias continued, "when we find common ground?" The human figure slipped on an imaginary object and flailed comically, falling with a theatrical thud. The alien figure hesitated, then mimicked the action, awkwardly copying the fall. A faint ripple of light passed between them, and the jagged line dissolved into a smooth curve. "This," Elias said, his voice soft but resonant, "is humor. Not just a sound, but a connection, a shared moment that bridges the unbridgeable." The hologram faded, and Elias turned back to the audience. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that thrummed with potential. "Humor is not a weapon," he said, meeting the gaze of as many delegates as he could. "It is not a threat. It is the realization that we are all in some way flawed, and it is through those flaws that we find understanding." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Honored delegates, I ask you not to fear our laughter, but to embrace it. Let it remind you that even in our differences, we can find moments of joy." The presiding speaker's gaze bore down on him. "Is this demonstration supposed to convince us, human?" "No," Elias said firmly. "The demonstration is only a step. Convincing you will take something far greater." He took a deep breath, the metallic tang of the air sharp in his throat, and delivered the punchline he and Reinar had crafted, a universal joke that relied on timing, tone, and a deliberately exaggerated delivery. The room was deathly still as the translator processed the words, transforming them into a dozen languages. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a low, rumbling sound emerged from one corner of the room. An alien delegate, an insectoid with shimmering, translucent wings, emitted a strange clicking noise that Elias could only assume was laughter. Another delegate joined in, their deep, resonant voice vibrating through the chamber. The laughter spread, tentative at first, but growing in strength. It was an awkward, discordant symphony, each species expressing humor in their own way. Some clicked, some rumbled, and some let out sharp, staccato bursts of sound. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. Elias felt his chest loosen, a weight lifting as he watched the transformation unfold. Even the presiding speaker tilted their head, their segmented limbs twitching in what might have been amusement. "Perhaps," the speaker said, their booming voice softer now, "we have misjudged." Elias allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. "Perhaps we all have." But just as the atmosphere began to shift, a sharp crackle interrupted the moment. The holographic display flickered, then blinked out entirely. A shadowed figure appeared on the far side of the chamber, their voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "Do not be deceived by this display," the figure roared, their tone dripping with venom. "The humans seek to lull us into complacency. Their laughter is a precursor to domination." The anti-human faction had made their move. Guards surged forward, their weapons gleaming under the chamber's lights, but the figure vanished into the shadows. The tension snapped back into the room like a coiled spring, delegates murmuring in alarm. Elias's heart pounded, his moment of victory slipping away. He turned to Reinar, his voice low but urgent. "We need to find out who's behind this, fast." Reinar nodded, his violet eyes narrowing. This is far from over. The chamber erupted into chaos as security forces scoured the shadows, their energy weapons casting sharp beams of light across the vast, shimmering walls. The presiding speaker's booming commands cut through the noise, but the delegates' murmurs of fear and confusion only grew louder. Elias Kade stood frozen at the center of the room, his moment of triumph shattered by the sudden intrusion. His chest tightened as he watched the fragile progress he had built teeter on the edge of collapse. "Stay calm," Reinar murmured beside him, his silver-hued face unreadable but his violet eyes sharp with intent. "Panic will only validate their fears." Elias nodded, though his pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to breathe, to focus. Whoever staged that outburst knew exactly what they were doing. They're trying to shift the narrative back to fear. "They succeeded," June said, stepping up beside them, her face pale but her voice steady. "The delegates are already retreating into their own camps. If we don't act fast, the vote will be decided by emotion, against us." Elias's mind raced. "Then we need to steer that emotion back. Show them the truth before the fear takes hold." "Truth is fragile in the face of chaos," Reinar said. "You'll need more than words this time." The presiding speaker's segmented limbs twitched as they addressed the room, their voice thunderous. "The chamber will be cleared until the intruder is found. This assembly is adjourned." "No!" Elias's voice rang out, cutting through the din. He stepped forward, his hands raised, the spotlight of the chamber's collective gaze falling on him once more. "This assembly cannot end in chaos. If we leave now, fear will rule the day." The speaker's many eyes fixed on him, their gaze like the weight of 1,000 judgments. "Do you presume to dictate the council's proceedings, human?" Elias straightened, his voice calm but resonant. "I don't presume to dictate anything, but I do know that fear is the enemy of reason. If we leave now, the seeds of doubt planted today will grow into war." The room quieted, the weight of his words hanging heavy. The speaker hesitated, their gaze shifting to the murmuring delegates. Then they gave a sharp nod. "Proceed." Elias turned to Reinar and June, his voice low but firm. "Get the projector back online. We're going to finish what we started." June nodded, already moving to the control console at the edge of the chamber. Reinar followed, his movements precise and deliberate. Elias turned back to the assembly, his hands clasped behind his back to steady the tremor in his fingers. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice steady, but carrying a note of urgency. "I know you are afraid. I know you look at us and see something you don't understand. But misunderstanding does not have to lead to conflict." He took a deep breath, the faint hum of the chamber's energy conduits grounding him. Laughter is not a weapon. It is a bridge, a shared moment that reminds us of our common flaws, our shared humanity, or whatever the equivalent may be for your species. It's a declaration, not of war, but of connection. The holographic projector flickered to life behind him, the display stabilizing as June worked frantically at the console. The two figures from before reappeared, the humanoid and the alien, this time standing side by side. The jagged line that had divided them was gone, replaced by a glowing thread of light that pulsed softly. "As you watch this," Elias said, gesturing to the display, "I want you to consider this simple truth. Fear divides, but understanding unites. Humor is not chaos. It is a way of saying, we are not so different." The figures on the display began to interact, their movements clumsy but mirroring each other. One slipped, eliciting a ripple of awkward sound that Elias hoped would translate as laughter. The other hesitated, then joined in. The light between them grew brighter, its pulse steady and rhythmic. "Laughter is vulnerability," Elias said, his voice soft but carrying through the chamber. "It is the courage to admit that we do not have all the answers, that we are flawed and imperfect, and in that imperfection lies the potential for connection." The murmurs in the chamber began to shift, their tone less fearful, more curious. Some delegates leaned forward, their expressions unreadable but engaged. Even the presiding speaker tilted their head slightly, their many eyes narrowing in contemplation. Elias pressed on, his voice gaining strength. "We are not your enemies. We are not perfect. But we are not a threat. And just as we have learned from you, I ask you to learn from us. Let this be the moment we choose understanding over fear." The holographic display reached its climax, the two figures standing together as the light between them grew into a brilliant, shared glow. The image faded, leaving the chamber bathed in the soft, ambient light of the walls. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, a sound emerged. It was soft at first, a low rumble from one of the insectoid delegates, but it grew, spreading through the room. It was laughter, awkward and discordant, but unmistakable. Other delegates joined in, their varied sounds creating a strange but harmonious cacophony. Elias's chest loosened, relief washing over him like a tide. He glanced at Reinar, who gave him the faintest nod of approval. June grinned, her shoulders relaxing as the tension in the room ebbed. The presiding speaker raised one of their limbs, signaling for silence. The laughter died down, replaced by a charged stillness. They studied Elias for a long moment before speaking. "Perhaps we have misjudged." Elias nodded, his voice calm but resolute. "Perhaps we all have." The vote was cast, and when the results were displayed, a wave of emotion swept through Elias. Humanity's status as a member of the Galactic Council was affirmed, not as a threat, but as a bridge to a new way of understanding. As the delegates began to file out, Reinar approached Elias, his silver skin shimmering faintly. "Your gamble paid off," he said, his tone even but carrying a hint of warmth. Elias smiled, exhaustion evident in his posture but his eyes bright. "Because you helped me make it work." June joined them, her grin wide. "You just made galactic history, Kade." Elias chuckled softly, the sound carrying an edge of disbelief. "I didn't make history. We did. All of us." As they left the chamber, the weight of the moment settled over him. Humanity had proven its worth not through strength, but through vulnerability, through the simple, profound act of laughter. And somewhere, Elias thought, as he stepped into the cool air of the corridor, the galaxy might just be a little brighter for it.